Are you thinking about getting a divorce and wondering how much the process will cost? I'm Matt Dolan with Dolan Divorce Lawyers in Connecticut, and today I'm going to give a basic framework for the costs associated with the divorce. Now, really, the cost and how much you will pay for your divorce really depends on your situation. If you get a lawyer, most lawyers will take an upfront retainer of, say, $5,000 to $10,000, and they will bill at an hourly rate, which will come out of that retainer, which is essentially a deposit. So depending on how much work your lawyer does on your case, you will either receive a portion of that retainer back or you will be billed in addition to the retainer. Generally, the hourly fee that your lawyer will charge is anywhere between $250 and on the higher end, $800 or $1,000 per hour. But most lawyers, depending on where you live, they will likely fall in the range of $400 to $500 per hour. And that is how most lawyers operate on that hourly fee. So there are some attorneys who may charge a flat fee depending on the stage of your case. This is far less common, but somebody may say, okay, we'll charge $5,000 initially, and then if we have to have a pretrial, a settlement meeting with a judge, we'll charge an additional flat fee, and if your case goes to trial, we'll charge an additional flat fee beyond that. That is far less common, particularly in Connecticut. Some lawyers even charge a flat fee for the entirety of your case, but again, that is very rare. The majority of lawyers will bill hourly with that initial retainer deposit. And ultimately, it's hard to predict how much you will pay, and that is why lawyers do charge an hourly rate. Some cases settle very quickly and may cost only $1,000 or a couple $1,000s, or a case can go to trial and cost $50,000, $100,000. Really, the sky's the limit depending on the complexity of your case, where it can become quite expensive. So because of that unpredictability on how a case will go, that is why lawyers generally charge an hourly rate. There are some fixed filing fee costs, which are relatively small compared to the attorney's fees. There's a $360 filing fee to file your case in Connecticut. You'll have to pay a marshal to serve your spouse. If your spouse files a cross complaint, they will have to pay a filing fee as well. So there are those fixed fees. Again, the complexity of your case will dictate how much your divorce costs. So if you have essentially no assets to divide, then it can be very quick. Whereas if you have complicated financial issues where you need to look at retirement account statements, bank account statements, and other assets, your attorney is going to need to gather those documents to exchange them with the other party and really pore through those documents to get an understanding of your finances. And the time that your attorney spends on going through your finances will cost more money. Now, you may also have to pay for expert witnesses. So if you have real estate that needs to be divided, maybe one party is buying the other party out of a house. In that situation, you're going to need to come up with the value of the house. So you may have to hire an appraiser to value the house. That can cost $500 to $1,000 or more if it's a very valuable property or a commercial property, for example. That can be more expensive. If one of the parties has a business, then you may have to hire an expert to come up with a value for that business. Or if somebody has a earning capacity that you feel is higher than what they are actually earning, you may have to hire an expert witness to come up with what that earning capacity is. So on the financial end, there are additional costs associated with experts. And then if you have complicated custody issues, there are additional costs that can come with that. You may need a private custody evaluation where a third party will come in and determine who should have custody of the children or what the parenting plan should be. You may have to hire a guardian ad litem, which is a separate, usually attorney. It doesn't have to be an attorney, but it's a third party who is meeting with your family, meeting with your child, contacting third parties to come up with a recommendation as to what is best for your child. And you are generally going to pay that guardian ad litem an hourly fee, which is similar to the fee that you would pay your attorney. So that can add to the cost. So you're probably wondering, what can I do to keep the costs down? First off, I would suggest that you be as organized and prepared as possible when speaking to your attorney. So don't just dump a million documents on them and expect them to organize those documents, because they or their paralegal will have to spend time organizing those documents. So if you can get everything to your attorney in a timely, organized fashion, that will allow them to spend less of their own time going through documents, following up with you to obtain documents that are missing, etc. You should also pick your battles. It doesn't make sense to spend $1,500 on attorney's fees fighting over a $500 item. That doesn't make sense. So, you may make concessions on less valuable things and really pick your battles on what is worth fighting over. You should also just in general try to be as reasonable as possible and listen to the advice of your attorney. Obviously, there's a lot of emotion that goes into a divorce, and you hire an attorney for a reason, to try to help ground you and give you advice to try to resolve your case. So if you listen to your attorney and try to be as reasonable as possible, that will help you ultimately reach an agreement with your spouse, so long as your spouse is also being reasonable, and that will help keep the costs down. Now, obviously, if your spouse is not being reasonable and you just have to have a trial, for example, in order to protect your own rights, there's not a whole lot you can do about that, and unfortunately, your attorney's fees will be higher in that situation. You may also want to consider mediation. And that is when you and your spouse sit down with a neutral third party to help you reach an agreement directly with one another with the help of that third party. It may help you work out issues more quickly if you're able to sit down and work directly with one another. Now, you will have to pay that mediator an hourly fee, which will be similar to the fees of an attorney. Generally, a mediator is an attorney, and you may have your own review counsel, separate attorney giving you advice on the side to prepare you for when you go into the mediation. So there would be, in that situation, potentially 3 attorneys versus just 2, the third being the mediator. But it might eliminate a lot of the back and forth by helping you reach an agreement more quickly in totality by working directly with a mediator. So those are the basics on the cost of divorce. Again, it's very hard to predict, and every situation is different. Now, if you don't have access to money and say your spouse controls all of the funds, there are things you can do to get the funds necessary to file for divorce and go through the divorce process. So you can file a motion for counsel fees, and you can hire an attorney who can help you do this, where you could get your spouse to pay your retainer if they control all of the money. So the fact that you may not have access to funds does not preclude you from having the representation that you need in a divorce, obviously, so long as your spouse has control of funds. If there's no money that either one of you have access to, then you'll be looking at either not having an attorney or paying for an attorney on a credit card, for example. And not everybody has to have an attorney. If there's not a lot of assets to fight over, it may not make sense for you to have an attorney, and it may make sense for you to be self-represented and your spouse to be self-represented and try to work it out directly with one another. So those are the basics on the cost of divorce. As usual, if you have any additional questions, you can contact our office. And if you are looking for representation in a divorce or family law case here in Connecticut, we would invite you to contact our office as well.